Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. with our special Labor Day issue, celebrating American labor and counterattacking the enemies of labor, which are coming out all over the place. We just saw Governor Jan Brewer of Arizona looking like death warmed over with a face that would stop a clock, railing against unions and demanding that her opponent repudiate support from unions. Well, God, you know, go look in the 20th century and see who was interested in smashing up unions, and you'll come to certain Central European leaders who were put out of business in 1945. You'll get the idea. We also want to attack the idea that Obama has done anything for unions. Obama has done zero. Obama is the most effective union buster that we've had, attacking the UAW, attacking the American Federation of Teachers, the National Education Association, and so forth with his stooge, Arnie Duncan. But let's go back and get a little more history. The industrialization of the United States is the precondition for unionization. You got to have some big industries, and the fact that we've lost them in the meantime is one of the worst things that has gone on. You got to have internal improvements. You got to have a railroad system. A land reform helps, right? The Homestead Act was a land reform. That essentially went from the Midwest out into the West. Unfortunately, the South never had it. This is the great failure of Thaddeus Stevens, the radical Republican, who tried to break up the landed estates of the Confederate leaders and distribute that to the freed slaves, but it also would have gone to a lot of white sharecroppers and others, and that essentially would have solved the persistent structural backwardness of the societal relations in the American South. But it didn't work. So what we're left with is a labor movement which will penetrate the South. Now, remember that Lincoln argued that labor is prior to capital and superior to capital. So the claim of labor on a decent standard of living is essentially backed up by notations from Lincoln. In 1866, you get the foundation of the National Labor Union in Baltimore. Unfortunately, that does not last because it is swept away by the Panic of 1873. The Panic of 1873, engineered by the British in the City of London to destroy the pro-union financier Jay Cooke of Philadelphia, the guy who had essentially invented the U.S. savings bond as a means of raising money for the war effort. But then we get the Knights of Labor with Terence Powderly. And remember, at this point, the positive faction in the United States is the Philadelphia faction. This was the faction that had been around Jay Cooke, but also Alexander Dallas Bache, the Careys, Henry Carey, Baldwin Locomotive, and others. So these were the economic nationalists, and without getting into too direct a connection, Terence Powderly operates some degree in synergy with them, although the factional situation is not good. Think of Germany at the same time. You have Bismarck as a strong nationalist leader, whatever his many faults, but he also worked with labor. He had a guy called Ferdinand Lassalle who created trade union groups that were supportive of Bismarck and resisted the British-backed Marxist encroachments by Marx and Engels, who were working, as we know, for the British. Where you don't have organization, you're going to have adventurism, and when you have opportunism, you're going to have adventurism as a response, and that's in Pennsylvania. The Molly Maguires, essentially with a reform program, no objection there, but then using violence to get that going, and this always backfires. In 1877, the railroad magnates, and this is, Uncle Dan Drew, Cornelius Vanderbilt, and Jay Gould, the bad Jay Gould, they try to impose a 10% pay cut, and you have a national railroad strike. So that's a big step forward, right? Once you get the communications of the railroad, you can also have strikes on that scale. The idea of the Knights of Labor is one big union. Enough with the artisan stuff, enough with the narrow stuff about the trades, right? It's fine to have boilermakers and plumbers and bricklayers and so forth, but what you really need is one big industrial union. So that's Powderly. And what Powderly and the Knights of Labor go for is an 8-hour day, and they're fighting for this in the 1870s. And this is not really attained until the 1930s, until the Wages and Hours Act of 1938 under the New Deal. So you can see the stubborn resistance of the legions of greed, of the reactionaries and proto-fascists as time goes on. And then we get, in the 1880s, economic downturns always coming, right? Always reflecting the crisis of the pound sterling over in London and the lack of a Bank of the United States, because it hadn't been recreated after the Civil War when it should have been. You do have unionization in the railroad systems, right? You get the Brotherhood of Railroad Engineers, the Brotherhood of Railroad Firemen, of trainmen, meaning brakemen, switchers, conductors. Later on, you get trackmen, clerks, sleeping car porters in the 1920s. They're largely black. That's Philip Randolph, the guy who organized the I Have a Dream, right? The march of Martin Luther King on Washington was essentially the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and A. Philip Randolph. And you can see his statue is in Union Station, where a lot of the people arrived for that. So in 1886, we're down in Marshall, Texas. There is labor history in Texas, right? There were some people in Texas in those days who wanted to fight for their rights. They weren't out there praising Glenn Beck and the Tea Party. They were out there fighting for their rights as workers and as Americans, because you have natural rights, and those include economic rights, believe you me. So Jay Gould, again, the bad Wall Street Jay Gould, wanted to impose a big wage cut on the workers, and that set off a huge nationwide rail strike in 1886. And that was essentially a general strike. Everything from Cincinnati all the way west to San Francisco was essentially paralyzed. Now, interesting how the ruling classes responded. We have these settlement houses in places like Chicago. We have foreign anarchists like Emma Goldman, British agent, being brought in as provocateurs. So you get these anarchist bomb-throwing societies. Anarchist bomb throwers in the 19th century are, without notable exception, British agents or Wall Street agents. So that's this famous Haymarket, right? The Haymarket incident of May 1886, when some cops get blown up. And this, of course, then becomes the basis for destroying the strike. It's just like the Piazza Fontana in Italy in 1969. You have a strike wave, get some terrorism going, get some anarchists out there, and you can break the strike wave. The only thing that went wrong from the Wall Street point of view was that the governor of Illinois, Altgeld, was not interested in playing along with this, and he didn't go into this total police state crackdown that the Wall Street people wanted. The AFL is formed in 1881, American Federation of Labor. That's in Pittsburgh, and this is skilled trade. So this is your aristocracy of labor. They're not very radical, and they're led by this guy Gompers, immigrant from Britain, who is anything but radical. And we'll pick up the story in just a minute.